Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today, in This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, I read the chapter where she discusses the idea that drinking is just a habit that you form, and that a lot of people convince themselves that their drinking is just habitual. They could give it up if they really wanted to, but they don't really want to, and it's no big deal. And she walks through some of the reasons why, for a lot of people, this might not actually be true, and they need to re-examine how they arrived at the conclusion that their drinking is just habitual rather than dependence on alcohol, in order to really determine whether they have a problem or not. And I'll read a couple of things that she writes. She says, "Your experience is that you regularly drink. You also observe regular habitual drinking around you. You assume, because of how frequently drinking occurs, not only in your own life, but also in the lives of those around you, that drinking must be habitual. This is an easy assumption. It is more palatable than the assumption that you and those around you drink regularly because you have become dependent on alcohol. A habit doesn't feel threatening. You conclude that drinking, because it is so regular and you are afraid to look for a more sinister reason, must be a habit." Now, that sounded very familiar to me. I was very fond of saying things like, I'm in the habit of coming home and drinking at night. And I was afraid to look at other potential reasons for that. I was afraid to consider the possibility that I might have a problem, because I knew enough about alcohol problems to know that the solution to that problem was likely going to be some kind of treatment and not drinking again for the rest of my life. And that frightened me quite a bit. And she talks about that fear later in this chapter. She says, "It is the fear that keeps us drinking, and the alcohol itself creates the fear. We fear that we will never be happy or at peace without drinking, and that stopping will mean we feel unhappy, that we are missing out. If you believe these false justifications even after you stop, when your health has improved and your relationships have been restored, you will continue to envy drinkers. You will believe their reasons for drinking and feel jealous that they are drinking when you are not." So I can tell you that there were times in my drinking life where, and times when I was drinking a lot, when I was drinking most of the day, where I became very frightened of the damage that I knew I was likely doing in my body, particularly to my liver. I convinced myself that I could feel pain in that area of my body. Even though some of the tests that I had received from doctors at that point said that my liver function was normal, I was convinced that there was something wrong. And there very well may have been the beginnings of something wrong. But I was incredibly frightened of these health problems that I knew were very likely if I continued drinking the way that I drank. And yet my fear of not drinking outweighed those problems. My fear of not drinking, of missing out, of not being happy if I didn't have alcohol in my life, that was far more significant to me than the fear of my potentially deteriorating health. And so I continued to drink. And there were times during that period in my life where I considered, I could go to a doctor and the doctor might say, you need to stop drinking, or else you're going to die. And I realized that I did not know what I would choose to do. I honestly did not know whether I would choose to follow the doctor's advice or whether it was just more desirable to keep drinking and live a shorter life and die young. And that should have been a key to me that I had a problem. But it wasn't. I first had that thought years before I quit drinking. And so the reason that I bring that up is to assure, if that sounds familiar to you, if you are thinking of drinking or you're at the beginning of this journey and that sounds familiar to you and you are worried that you will live a life of missing out, of not being as happy as you were when you were in your alcoholism, when you were in your addiction, I after almost 5 years without alcohol and 2 years, almost 2 years completely sober, I'm here to tell you that it turns out that's not the case. I am happier now in my life than I have ever been in my memory, except for childhood. I am happier than I've ever been in my life. My life is, I feel more included in social situations because I know how to talk to people. I care about what other people have to say, which means they're more likely to talk to me and include me in activities. And things are great at work. I don't, I don't have to worry about all of the things that I used to have to worry about constantly when I was trying to keep my addictions going at the same time as the rest of life. And the feeling of being left out or of missing out on things, I don't have that, because any hole left by the alcohol or drugs has been filled up 10 times by the other things that have come into my life as a result of my recovery. So I just want to reassure anybody who feels this fear that I understand it, because I felt it too, and I was at a point in my addiction where the idea of dying young and continuing to drink, I was potentially okay with that. But I'm also here to tell you that in recovery, especially if you're working a program of recovery where you get support to get through some of the difficulties that come with trying to recover from these kinds of issues and disorders, there is so much more joy and inclusion than you can ever imagine when you're in your addiction. And I promise you that things get so much better than you could think of once you get to this side of things. So don't be scared to ask for help to get there. All of us had to ask for help to get here, and it's worth it. It is totally worth it. So that's it for today. I'll be back here tomorrow with more. Have a good one.